Welcome back. This is a podcast with Eugene Kwaku, and Eugene is all about global PR. He was born in Ghana. He is living in Japan, and he helps Japanese companies market themselves internationally to get the public relations buzz going, to get the word out, to do the marketing and messaging and all those fun things. So we are going to find out what Eugene does, about this upcoming event he has planned, about how he can help you and your company, and even more importantly, all of these fun lessons about your marketing and about building a business and entrepreneurship and all those sorts of things, so that way we can get those important lessons, get our mission and our future dialed in. So Eugene, glad to be speaking with you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for your time. I'm excited.
I'm excited as well. And so I want to get deep into what you're all about and who you are and where you came from. But as far as like getting people's attention, right? Getting people to sit up and get really excited. What is the elevator speech as far as you? Like, what sort of change do you put out there in the world, and why should we pay very close attention to what you have to say next?
So I am originally from West Africa, Ghana. I was born there and I moved to Japan when I was 5 years old. And I grew up in Japan from elementary school to university, all in Japan. So it kind of makes me uh, very kind of Japanese. Like my first language is almost Japanese. And I'm having, like, I take time weekly to study English conversation or English topics. So that's the kind of like the background of where I'm from. And growing up in Japan, I was super passionate about entrepreneurship. I wanted to build something, and something that contributes to the good of the world, good of society. So I've been doing different small projects. When I was in elementary, I was selling books. Like I would buy books, I'll read it, and I'll sell it as a used books to different people. Like that was my small hustle. And then after university, I started a small project called We as One. It's an NPO organization, and we focused mainly on helping Japanese companies broadcast their mission or projects globally. So that was my starting point. And then eventually we sold that project, that business. And right now I am again back to my entrepreneurship kicks and uh, uh, looking for different, what would you call it? Different opportunity in different industries. Yeah, that's kind of like a broad details about where I'm from and what I'm currently up to.
I like it. You have that entrepreneurial spirit built into you, and you're doing what a lot of us are doing these days, which is going through many different lifetimes, right? Sometimes every 5 or 10 years, you have to pivot into some new career or some new project or some mission, and just like take your own personality and your own skills and your own knowledge with you and help these larger organizations fulfill their larger mission, right? And to kind of pursue these kind of different media opportunities and get the repetition out as far as what kind of transformation they want. And so, having said all of what you said, what do you think is unique about you? Like, how do you really stand out compared to a lot of these other entrepreneurs or marketers?
I think the perspective of one thing I can share is intercultural, a keyword, intercultural communication. For example, the first language in Japan is not English, right? So if we could bridge that gap, if there's someone, if there's like a system or a service that can help out bridge the communication gap, I think there's a value added there, meaning there's so many good service or so many interesting things in Japan that are yet not communicated in global market. So I think coming from my background, I'm able to see that difference. Like, oh, this is unique about Japan that is not yet known in the States. Maybe we could um, add value there, help that company and help them um, launch US version, United States version of the project. So like that's the kind of uh, uh, actions or ability to see that I may have, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense that in different areas of the world, people have innovated in different ways, but those maybe remain secrets because of the communications and the cultural barrier. And if we have someone like you who is multicultural, multi-country, you can kind of take the secrets there and move them over there. And I've only been to Japan once. I'm an American, so we don't travel very much. I was there, I think maybe 13 years ago, and I was amazed because, well, for a few things, right, about the minimalism and the cleanliness, and there were lots of signs. I don't think I've ever seen as many signs, and many times the signs were polite. The signs said please. There were big long sentences, and I felt like I was in like a Nintendo or a Wii game. Everything was very like cutesy and very happy, and I was especially impressed with, well, with like the train system and the guys with the white gloves that would kind of do little dances and push the button. And I learned later that that was called like a point and say. And there was
Right.
some kind of safety thing where like when they do anything operating the trains, if they point at something and say what they're doing, it like slows them down, and it drastically reduces the rate of mistakes. And I
Yeah.
was also amazed just at the efficiency. Like everything was very tiny, and sometimes you would go to a restaurant, and this was like 2010s. You would
Yeah.
use a touch screen, or like you'd push buttons to order some food. And in a restaurant where maybe four employees would work in America, over there just one person was working. So I can definitely see what you're saying about things done differently, and then we can maybe study that and say like, hey, like this is a very like alternative and good way, and maybe a more efficient or maybe a shortcut to what we're doing here. And you heard about this in like the late 80s, early 90s, right, with like the car manufacturing and the workplace efficiency. And so is there anything along those lines that maybe should be spoken about as far as the innovations you've seen in Japan that maybe are not known in other countries?
That's a very good point. I think there's there's excuse me, both good side and bad side about this, which is when a country there's a society that is hard to penetrate by global influence, they create the good side is they create their own unique culture, right? It's less influenced by others. So that way, I think like the anime culture or Japanese like IT technology, tech culture, like those came from that environment. I think that's the unique and good thing about that aspect. The part that um, that needs change or improvement is because it's less penetrated by global influence. The same like the common understanding throughout other countries are not yet adopted in Japan. Does that make sense? For example, let's say something I'm trying to see if I can come up with some common understanding globally. I mean, as humans, like we all know this, but for example, let's respect each other. Let's say there's a rule that's known globally, right? We have to respect each other. It doesn't matter what race you come from or what background you come from. Like that, it can be adapted later on in Japan. So when you visit Japan, you feel like, oh, this is very common in other countries globally, but in Japan, it's not yet seen. So that aspect requires improvement. But I think like that's a fun thing to do, right? To also approach the improvement and help out. So though there's good parts and parts that requires improvement. And yeah, like I said, anime culture is a one huge innovation, I could say. The way the industry can focus on one category, that is animation and entertainment, and they will build all sorts of product around one character. For example, Dragon Ball, like it's a huge business now, like hundreds of millions. So I think that's specifically to focus on one industry. I think anime culture has a massive potential globally.
Wonderful. The focus on one singular thing, and uh, yeah. So there's and it's a two-way street, right? There's what we can learn from them and what they can learn from us, and so you have interface with some of these companies that you like you mentioned, We Are One and some others, and so what would you say is a big accomplishment of yours? Like is from you specifically? Like sometimes you jump into some company and there are problems you see right off the bat, right? And you say, hey, let's do this and this, and you do some kind of transformation, get to a goal. So is there any kind of like a before and after story that you feel like sharing about like about any of these companies that you've helped?
I think I'm very biased towards this, but I think the anime project that we did previously was quite a success. It's still going on, but there's a project called um, Oni Project, Operation Oni. It's basically Oni means demon in English. It's a Japanese term, Oni, and they are it's still a small project. The comic writers, producers are still coming together, and there are a few famous voice actors that are involved in this project. And we're basically the story is about uh, the main character, a person that came from like a poor background, fighting demons around the world, and basically trying to make the world a peaceful place. That's kind of the narrative of the story. Um, they're still working on this, and how we were involved in that project was they had the idea and they basically had the Japanese version of it, but it was not yet known in the States. So we went in and we drew up the plan for the marketing and the sales, and it basically built a whole business plan around the project. And right now, I think in California, it's starting to get recognized little by little. But we want to have this branch out to Europe, Asia, and different countries. So that's one project I'm very excited about.
Wonderful. And so, you mentioned about drawing up plans, and I think that many times we get stuck in that middle part, right? We say, oh, I want all these things to happen. I'll draw these plans. And then we see all this sort of success. But there's so many things that can go wrong, right? There's the setting your goals and time management and revisiting the milestones and dealing with people and making sure people kind of do what they're supposed to. And so, what sort of headaches have you come across when you draw up a plan like this, but then, 2 weeks, 4 weeks later, then there are some difficulties? Do you have any difficulties you share or just things that you've learned about the headaches that it takes from turning a plan into reality?
I think it's a weird thing to say, but I think communication is quite a challenge. It's not very efficient when there's communication involved. So the way we tackle this is we come up with variations. We come up with like 3 or 6 variations of plans, and we use that as like a base. And in that plan, we have right now we have ChatGPT, so it's much more easier. But what we do is we basically hypothesize all the sorts of problems up front. And when we meet those problems, we can just take that and then implement it in the system we already built. So I think that kind of um, navigation system is super valuable in this kind of environment, whatever project anyone pursues.
Okay, so I anticipate a few problems, knowing that, well, you might not anticipate the problems exactly, or there might even be some unforeseen problems, but at least you are accounting for some of those roadblocks coming up. And what do these sorts of systems look like? Are we talking about a document? Is it created in software? Like what, like when you put these things down in concrete written form, what does the plan look like?
So it's very simple. It's basically a combination of Google Drive and Google Sheets. And then we have ChatGPT. Those are the three main like dashboards that we prepare. And yeah, like the important thing is you don't want to complicate things, right? When it comes to systems, it has to be simple, easy to navigate, and directly related to the objective. Like those are the things that we look at.
Okay, and so have you? So you mentioned something that's kind of curious about not overcomplicating things. So do you have a fun story to share about that? Like, has there been a time when you made one of these plans and it was just like, okay, we need to simplify this, we need to reduce this?
There's so many, but I think, let's see, what I can share is this will sound very simple, but for example, when we are communicating with other team members, and what I look at is I look at how many, for example, if you look at Facebook Messenger, the message comes in boxes, right? Like this person will send the message and the next person will send the message. So you can see that in boxes. So I count the numbers of those boxes and I go, okay, how many boxes are there between conversation to implementation? And if the boxes are more than like between 3 to 5, I think is maximum. If it goes above that, I think I go, okay, there's something wrong here. Not we're spending more time talking than implementing. So there's different ways to focus, like different way you can focus on things, and that way you can navigate and uh, continuously work to simplify the system.
Okay, so if there's too much talking and not enough implementing, then that needs to be adjusted there. And so what has you excited these days about marketing? Like I believe that we talked about the podcast issue, right? Like it's great to there's so many new like podcasts out there. It used to be like you could only get on the local news or like a print magazine or something, but now there's all these opportunities. So as far as what you've done to help get the word out, do you have a favorite medium, or is there something that has you excited about the new ways of communicating?
Let's see. That's a very good question. I think this could maybe counterintuitive, but there's so much information out there, and I approach it as whatever information we put out or we help companies put out is not going to be seen. Like that's the perspective I approach it distribution from. So I think in this era, there's so much information. So just putting out details or like podcast content is not enough. I'm still trying to figure this out, but and I don't think this answer is to use ChatGPT to just create hundreds of content and just bombard people with information. I think one thing that can be an answer is partnerships. So rather than one company starting from scratch, building partnership with different individuals or companies that are already running the medium is a good way to go. And in doing so, you don't just partner and again, you don't just build a new content. You it's better if we could leverage the channel that is already working. For example, if it's podcast, um, if the listeners if there's a listener of the podcast and there's event participants, then if the event participants, there are more people and more conversion happening in the event participant area, then that should be the part where other companies should come in and try to um, build value on top of. Does that make sense? So it's not just about going with all kinds of medium. It's about really identifying what works within the medium. I think that may be a way to go.
And I found that to be helpful. That I mean, and it's there's a little bit of a parallel here in what we're talking about, right? We're talking about Chat GPT, and we're also talking about this idea of visitors, attention, traffic, what gets noticed. And in both of these cases, there's a need to look at the feedback, right? And like you use Chat GPT and you say, hey, can you write an ad for me, write a blog post for me, but then it's not quite there and you say, hey, can you change this and then it gets better with every iteration until you get to the final finishing point. And then you're saying that you do all these things for being on podcasts or the YouTube videos or the ads, which is all great. But then there's this necessary recurring step of saying like, well, what got people to engage and notice this in my social post? What got the likes and the comments, and doing more of that? So I find that helpful because it seems like there's more noise than ever, right? With all it's so easy to make a video. It's so easy for ChatGPT to crank out the content. There's all this stuff, but then we need to look and see like what's good in all this stuff. And so we mentioned ChatGPT a few times, and ChatGPT fascinates me. I don't know about you, but I've used it every day since it's come out. I'm always like trying different things, but I'm always having the focus on, will this make me money? Will this save me time? Is this something that will grow my business? And so what is your opinion on ChatGPT, or what advice do you have for the sorts of companies you help on how they can use ChatGPT as something that helps their company and is not just a waste of time?
I think, and yes, same here. I love ChatGPT. I use it every day. Maybe every like 3 hours, I'm using ChatGPT. Um, how companies, I think it's easier for me to answer differently. How companies should not use ChatGPT, if I could reframe or change the question that way. How to not use it is, the interesting thing is you get immediate answer, right? So it's there's a space between receiving the answer and actually understanding the details that ChatGPT just shared with you and converting that into action, if that makes sense. For example, traditionally, when we didn't have ChatGPT, we worked so hard on gathering information and tried to come up with answers. And that feedback loop in our mind like help us take from question, answer to action. And ChatGPT, we don't spend too much time thinking, right? So because we get immediate answers. So I think it's important to build a framework where you're still getting immediate answer, but you still want to spend more time analyzing that answer, or like not just whether it's true or not, but really spending time to think when you receive answer from ChatGPT. So I think that it's more psychology, but I think that's important in order to fully utilize ChatGPT. The transition between receiving answer to implementing.
And I think about this idea a lot, that it's called thinking fast and slow, right? That there's, say you're in a crowded room and you're like, I'm looking for this specific person, there they are, versus where should I go on my next vacation? And then you might think about that over many weeks, and it's like two different modes of thinking. And you're so right that when we get the answer right away, then we might not be giving the correct amount of time into our own thought about, well, am I asking this question correctly? And am I properly deciding between, is this useful or is this not useful? And you're definitely making me realize something about me using ChatGPT, that I have to like deliberately slow my mind down and sometimes even ask it a question and I don't like the answer. And I say, I need to ask a more detailed question, or like a question in a different way, because what I thought made sense just was misinterpreted. And so that's very interesting to think about. And then, so as far as, well, what you do you have anything to speak about as far as like the tools? Like we mentioned the tools of ChatGPT, but like, are you a fan of like, creating the videos? And you mentioned about Google Drive, but just what sorts of tools have made your life easier and made these businesses' lives easier as well?
So a while ago, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, we built this thing again using ChatGPT. Um, I may share this in a chaotic way, but hopefully I can organize it
Well,
afterwards.
maybe share it in the chaotic way, and we'll transcribe it and put it through ChatGPT and have it make sense. How's that?
That's a very good idea. So the thing we did was we built this experimental model. Basically, let's see. So it's basically to take ChatGPT's answer and turning that into action. The way to we figured that the best way to do that is to put this answer into an experimental framework, meaning when, for example, when you want to, let me see, what would be a good example? Let's say I want to eat healthy food. Um, in the next 3 weeks, I want to go from not healthy to very healthy. Let's say that's the objective. I asked ChatGPT, how can I do this? And what's the best way to go? And it would just dump the answer, right? We take this answer as a one knowledge base, and we continue to collect answer from ChatGPT as well as any material we can collect from books or other internet sources. And we put this into a knowledge base, and we start um, approaching each information as a unit of experiment, if that makes sense. So, and we take that information and we put that into, for example, 3 weeks experimental model. We run that and we come up with feedback. So that kind of knowledge processing machine, I I see has been super helpful. Something that we built with ChatGPT. It's kind of like a personal
Fun.
project, but yeah, that was a fun thing to build.
And it sounds like it, especially the iterating and making it better. And that's another mindset that I like to tap into because like I do programming, I do writing, and there's definitely something to like you're super excited when you start something, and the middle is when your excitement really drops, but then you get to a milestone, maybe not the very end, but you get to like some sort of a finishing point, and you're like, hey, I got a surge of dopamine. Like I feel like I have a good feeling about my work ethic and a job well done. And do you come across this because we all have issues with time management or motivation or just seeing a project through to the end to completion? And so, have you experienced these sorts of moments of like saying like I'm excited and then the middle it's just I'm trudging through the mud and by the end I'm excited again? I mean, what's that like for you?
I think for me, like I always want to get better. Um, and I have a system. Again, it's another system, but I'm I heavily rely on systems. So usually when we start the project or I start a project, I create a routine, and eventually the routine helps me like run the day to day, so I'm working automatically. There's no motivation ups and downs. I rely rather on routines. So that's one. And then within the routine, for example, there's every 3 months I take 2 weeks vacation. I just completely go off grid and I don't engage with any work related stuff. So that's within the routine, and I find that system very helpful in running projects with high intensity, high focus, and also with the um, with the harmony of resting after the intense focus. So yeah, that's one thing. Um, and even that sometimes, like that in itself becomes the automatic machine. So I create another set of routine to get out of that whole set of system as well. But I'll definitely recommend everyone to kind of rely more on systems and routines and not too much on motivation.
I like that a lot. That there is value in trying different things and doing it in kind of, I mean, maybe even like a written down, formal, documented way. That way you can figure out what works for you. That way you can figure out your own rhythm. And that way you have this sort of intentionality. And I imagine that maybe people resist this idea because they think it makes it not fun. But the alternative is to have total chaos. And the upside to doing this is you have some intentionality, right? You say, well, here are the rules that I've defined for myself, and if it's not working, maybe I can revise and revisit. But this way, you have this sort of consistency and some kind of reliability in what you do. And so I like this idea of you saying like you have these focus periods and then the vacation. And so like what is your like time management like during the like your during the throughout the week, throughout the day? Do you have like set hours or a set kind of like work input and output?
Yes, so definitely it's very simple. It starts from 6:30 and then it lasts up until 9:30 p.m. Monday to Saturday, and the Sunday is a whole day off, so no work on Sundays. And I modeled this from I think this was I have it here on my desk. I think was it George Washington? I forgot, but one of the founding fathers in
Okay.
America. Yeah, he there was an archive where he was sharing his daily routine, and when I was going through different models, I thought, oh, this may suit me better. So I just implemented that, and yeah, that has been working very well for me.
And I'm not sure I'm remembering this or if it's something else, but Thomas Jefferson, another one of the founding
Thomas,
fathers, was big on this, and he
right?
had this crazy routine. Like he'd wake up and like run a bunch of miles, and I mean, uh, running for exercise wasn't even invented until 200 years later. So he was like centuries ahead as far as the physical fitness, and he'd do like this running and this reading, and you're giving me flashbacks to history class in high school, just these ideas of having these sorts of blocks of time. And so it's great to think about as far as we've been discussing about your goal setting and your mindset and your time management. And, something that is, it will probably always be a problem for the rest of humanity is getting outside one's comfort zone, right? And there's motivation and discipline is one thing, but then there's confidence and including like what you're doing here, right? Being on a podcast or what you recommend some of these companies do is going and out and doing these media appearances. And sometimes there can be some uncertainty or some self doubt. And so, do you have any thoughts about overcoming your own self doubt or finding your own confidence, stepping outside of your comfort zone, especially for some like uncertain interactions, such as what we're doing right now, a podcast? If someone is afraid to podcast, what do you have to say to them?
That's a very good question. If someone is afraid, I think to rely on the objective helps. Meaning, like, why do you want to share those messages? Like, answering that question is a good way to go, and remembering the answer. I think everyone has their own like big goal or like the big dream, and yeah, so relying on that is a good idea. It helps clear up the noise.
What, in other words, your purpose, and have such a huge purpose, a reason why, that any sort of temporary roadblocks, including your own confidence or problems that you're stuck on, they're very small in comparison to that. And so have you put this in writing, or do you have like a big goal for yourself or a purpose that you feel like sharing with us?
Yeah, I have so many goals. I don't know if we can go through all of them, but to pick one, um, the ultimate purpose or ultimate goal is I want to see myself evolving all the time. Like I want to like that itself is the purpose. For me, that's where it starts. And I like building things. I like coming up with ideas, and I like to see it go from idea to implementation to impact. So I like that. I enjoy that a lot. And so my purpose is to do that as many times as I can in this lifetime.
Wonderful. Self-improvement and getting stronger and getting your skills and your achievements so big that at some point you'll look back at your past self and say, well, I've come such a long way. And so for those entrepreneurs who are also on a path, do you have any sort of life lessons to share there? Are there things in your own ups and downs that have just really made you think about, past mistakes or even just things that you wish you'd known sooner?
Like even yesterday, I think there was a thing I was like, I should have done this sooner. There's always that one, right? Like things you should
Always.
consider. Um, let's see. I think not taking actions for me, it relates to the confidence conversation, but I, in the past, it took me so much energy to experiment things, to try out different things, to get out of my comfort zone and try out things. And that came from like a background, like my childhood, where I grew up in a family where I was kind of restricted, uh, and couldn't try out too many things. And of course, my parents wanted to protect me, and that was the reason. But that habit, I came from that background, so I had uh, a negative habit in terms of trying new things, and I had to overcome that. And the way I did that was just massive, just studying so many things and um, starting small, and finally I'm at the stage where I can, it's so easy for me to try out new things. But um, I think I would say that was my past mistake and something I overcame, and maybe the listeners can implement. It would be great if there's anything listeners can implement from this story.
Well, it's sort of your default programming, right? To remain in safety. And then when you have children of your own, of course you want to protect them, but then there's such a thing as overprotection and without even realizing it, right? And if you're not careful, then you can pass on this habit of playing it safe, of keeping it to yourself, which I guess it was fine in the past, right? If you were living in a little village that was isolated from everyone else. And if you stepped out of line, then the tiger might eat you. But nowadays, in this era of global communication, you can start a business, you can try new things. It is good to take risks, and it might not feel natural. And so it's an important lesson, I think, for a lot of us. And something that comes to mind from all this, and if it's okay with you, like to get a little bit personal, like what are your sort of personal relationships like? Like what are your like friendships like? We started off this call saying how important people were, right? That chat gpt, it's a thing, but it's important to have these relationships, do these joint ventures. So as far as like what you've learned, as far as overcoming the protective childhood, what do you have to share with us about making friends, developing relationships? Like what has your progress been in that department?
Let's see. I don't know if this is worth. I don't know how much. Like I don't know if it's valuable, but I'll just share what I have in mind. When it comes to relationship, I'm more of. I spend at least 80% of my time by myself, like solo, and because I have in my system, I have such a intensity in focusing. I really focus on things, so I don't really allow myself enough to branch out, reach out to new types of people, different communities. Yeah, I don't do that enough, I think. And so that's 80% just myself working on projects, working on new ideas or studying. The rest 20% is friends and family. And when it comes to friends, yeah, recently I'm more open to exploring like different categories. But before, even with friends, I will only hang out with people who have same mentality, like who like building businesses, who like building projects. So that's kind of my status, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's still
Right. That
it
Yeah,
can
yeah.
be.
You're open to the possibilities of making a connection with someone wildly different from you, and then you have way other different experiences and ways of thinking, and that's very wonderful to think about. And I can definitely relate to what you're saying of looking at the amount of time you spend alone versus with others and saying, well, hey, here's my natural state, but it might serve me better if I maybe try to adjust that ratio and do other things. And so we mentioned about how you help these companies kind of broaden their horizons and market into other countries. And so, what is in store for you for the future? What has you excited about future goals, opportunities, achievements? What's coming up for you?
So when it comes to um, this intercultural communication, the industry of intercultural communication, I think there's so much opportunity here, and I would like some more people to get into the industry. And right now, what I am seeing is when it comes to Japan, Japanese companies, there's not a lot of joint ventures going on between Japanese companies and overseas companies. And again, this has to do with language barriers, cultural differences. So if we could solve that part, that language barrier, cultural differences, and then business culture differences, I think there's massive value to be created or value add in that environment. So joint
And
venture between countries that's originating from different background or areas.
do you have any ideas on how that might be possible? It seems like a huge problem to solve. But then you see, like for example, you see some companies like Microsoft all the time. They'll be doing like webinars and hangouts and things like that. Sometimes you see, like we mentioned, Chat GPT. They have like their APIs. They make it very easy for other companies to interface with what they're doing. And so, like, do you see anything that these Japanese companies maybe should be doing more of in order to increase this networking?
So the thing they can do more of, let's see, for example, when it comes to the marketing conversation, the Japanese, the current, the thing that's happening now is these Japanese companies, they find influencers or um, different medium in other countries, and they partner with them, and they broadcast their message on that TV program or podcast or through the influencers. Um, that's what's going on now, and I think something that would be more, the opportunity here is not just partnering in terms of like advertisement, but partnering from the perspective of building companies together, like even M&A, like merger and acquisition. I think that would be an interesting route for these Japanese companies to take. Um, it's more leverage, and if those partnerships could be value for both parties, I think there's opportunity there. It's something that I'm still looking, but I may explore in the future.
A much deeper integration, right? Of not
Yes.
just a one-off advertising, but something more long-term. And so you've thought a lot about these ideas, and like you've said about how like you learned this lesson or that lesson. As far as us kind of really deeply researching and thinking about some of these things that you talked about, do you have any like favorite sort of business or marketing books that have really helped you, or that maybe you think that we should be checking out?
I think psychology related. I don't know if you have heard. I forgot who the writer is, but Psycho-Cybernetics. There's a book called Psycho-Cybernetics, and it's basically a psychology knowledge coming from a specialist. This is a very broad way to explain, but and what it does is it looks at human brain, how human brain works, how human psychology works, and relate that to business conversation. Um, so when it comes to targeting or prospecting or even marketing, I think looking at it from the perspective of psychology, like diving deeper, not just the methodology, I think it's a good way to go. So I would recommend, yeah, psychocybernetics.
Wonderful. From the year 1960 from Dr. Maxwell Maltz.
Yes.
It says it's about how it can drastically affect your happiness and success,
Mm.
human self image, regulate self concept, And it's weird to think about these things, right? Because it's like here's my mind, here's this computer, and yet I'm reading this thing about how my mind works. I'm getting these ahas. It's like it's literally self-awareness. And something that I found helpful a few years ago was to take some of these personality tests, right? To do like a Myers-Briggs and a Colby score, things like that. And I ended up putting them on my LinkedIn, like the headline. And sometimes I'll go to ChatGPT and I'll say, "Hey, I'm this personality type. Like what? And I'm here's my problem. And like what answer do you have for me specifically? Are you a fan of these kinds of like personality tests, or have you done any sort of like made any progress there?"
Yeah, 100%. I love, like, I'm into that because it's about self-awareness. I think that's where it starts. Um, so yeah, I took my MB Myers-Briggs as well. What was yours? Do you remember?
I need to look at my LinkedIn. I think I'm a uh, just give me 1 second.
No problem.
I thought I had it on. I think I was like INTJ.
Oh,
Why can't I see it on my? I closed the page. All right, let me try. Did I
mine
take
is
it off? I might have taken it off. I think I was like a
90.
INTJT or something like that.
Mm,
I think I need to. Ah, I think I had it on my headline and someone took it off. But yeah, I want to say INTP or INTJ, something like that.
nice. Mine is same, INTP or INTJ. I came from
Okay.
INFJ and then I became INTJ, INTP. Yes.
Okay. So it changes over time?
Yeah, those are the things, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but even Myers-Briggs, like, you can change your character, right, based on your environment. So if you're an INTJ person and you want to, let's say you want to become a politician, let's say you want to become the president of the United States, then it's important for you to implement characteristics from different model. So you should be more of debater than the INTJ, the architect, right? So yeah, it's something you can always switch by changing the environment and changing the habit. So yeah, I am very cautious and um, aware of my sprints.
And that's a nice little mini strategy there is figure out your Myers-Briggs types and then look up these famous past celebrities, presidents, successful business people, whoever, who also had that same personality type and look at their struggles and look at what they did well and what they avoided. And so that way you can follow in their footsteps and it makes it more interesting, right? Instead of looking at just the data, you're finding out about this whole biography, this whole story, and it's wonderful to think about. And so speaking of things that are wonderful to think about and wonderful to do, we definitely want to make sure that people can find out more about you, such as contact details, websites, next step, calls to action. And so since we're getting near the end of our conversation and someone wants to know so much more about Mr. Eugene Kwaku because we have only scratch the surface about what's possible, especially with these businesses who need the help of someone like you. How does someone know if they're an ideal kind of person to contact you, and where should they go to do that sort of thing?
So I was just searching now if they can. Let's see if that website still works. Okay, so globaljp.org, global.jp globaljp.org is a website that's still running, and it has my brief bio and contact information. So if they're interested, they can connect with me via this website.
Wonderful. Globaljp.org, is that right?
Yes, correct.
Fantastic. So it is time to go now to globaljp.org. And what will someone find there? What's interesting? What's remarkable?
So it basically showcases some of my projects there. Right now, I am also working on like starting different events. So those are listed on the website. And yeah, importantly, I'm open to growth related conversation. Like, it can be Myers-Briggs or it can be businesses. So if anyone is interested, they can reach me from the contact section on the website.
Very nice. And it is definitely worthwhile to do that, especially because as we've been saying, people are important. and socializing and communicating is important. And guys like you and me 10, 20 years ago, socializing seems scary, right? You had to be in person, you had to pick up the phone. But now we can go to a website, we can go to a contact form, we can email, we can message and get this conversation started, and even Zoom and things like that. You don't have to deal with some of the awkward unpleasantness that past generations had to do. And you can read a book all day long and watch videos all day long, but having that conversation, you ask specific questions, get specific insights, you can really grow your business by leaps and bounds. And as we wrap up our conversation here, Mr. Eugene Kwaku, and we want to end with a bang and not a whimper. And I really like to maybe stump my guest a little bit and ask them about a fun quote or moral or lesson that has perhaps helped them and that they want to pass on to help us. So does anything come to mind as far as a fun quote, moral, or lesson that you want to share with us?
Oof, that's so good. I should have these memorized, right? Let's see.
Right. Right. If you're a PR guy, have your data bank so that way when you go on a show, you can just pull some of those out. Yes.
That's such a great insight. Thank you, thank you. Let's see. Let me see if I have anything. Not really. Okay, I have this thing from a TV show called Billions. It's like a quote. I have this written down my memo. It goes like this. It goes, there are few people who can do the math. There are people who can do the math, and there are also people who can do, I think, what was it called? There are people who can do the math, and there are people who can explain the math. But those who can do both, they become billionaires. There's a quote like that, and I find that very exciting in terms of having ability to do both, to do multiple things. Um, it's not multitasking, it's more of understanding different disciplines and able to implement in pursuing your goal. So yeah, that's like one phrase that I really like.
And I love that show and I love that phrase, and it's a great idea. Just that that there's different levels of depth, right? And there's like the most shallow level is just like like can you say like, well, can you explain this concept to a 5-year-old? Well, can you explain this concept to someone who's like in your industry but maybe not delivering all the details? And then can you actually like do the nitty gritty, right? Can you write the code, do the writing, figure out the process map and the business systems? And that's a very interesting thing to think about. Is you have this idea and there's the kind of the slider, you could say, back and forth, right? And on one end there's just here's the basic concept, and as you get deeper there's the actual doing the work, doing the math, the calculations, or whatever form that is. And that's very interesting to think about these different levels of awareness. So as we are considering this thought, that there are people that can do the math and those that can explain the math. And if you can be that kind of person, then you will definitely go far in many places, and especially in the world of global communication and marketing and PR. And so to take that next step and to find out more about what Eugene Kwaku has in the pipeline, has coming, his thoughts, ideas, achievements, accomplishments, the very next step is to go to globaljp.org. Go there, check out the website, and if you're unsure what to do, your default course of action should be to go to that contact form and tell Eugene you liked him on the podcast. Get this conversation started with him. Eugene is an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs love problems because problems mean you can find solutions, and Eugene wants to provide the solution for you in order to get your company to the next level. So globaljp.org is the place to go. And thank you very much, Mr. Eugene Kwaku, for showing up, over delivering, and just having a fun time, being very open and honest and helpful. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Robert. I had a blast. This was great. I would love to do it one more time. Thank you so much.
Let's do it. I'll hold you to that.
Thank you. Thank you.